Hey everybody! Okay, so we're in chapter 9 now. We're going to be talking about multiple causation. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, in a previous chapter, we had talked about the simplest design that you can do in research, which is the two-group experiment. So you would have one independent variable with two levels in a simple experiment. What we're going to do in this chapter is talk about doubling that basic building block and beginning to engage in what we call a factorial design. Factorial design is really the heart and soul of psychological research because hardly anything in psychology is ever going to be distilled down to one cause, to one factor that's important. So the factorial design allows us to consider multiple factors that may be important in an outcome. Factors are independent variables. These are things that we think might be impacting performance on some dependent variable. The great thing about a factorial design is that it gives us the power to investigate several factors in a single experiment. So we can test all at one time each independent variable alone, and then with a little twist of the math, we can look at the interaction of multiple factors together. So what do I mean by all this? What do I mean, Basil? Okay. Oh, that is not the picture I meant to show you. Something is going wrong with the slide. Hold on a second. So you can see it here. Why is it not showing up? Enjoy some editing moments here. So what we're looking at here is a picture of a study that involved two independent variables. So down here on the bottom we see the confluence model risk level that is assessing the risk of behaving aggressively. And you can see that we have very low risk, we have 3 levels of low risk, and then we have moderate risk and we have high risk. So there are 6 levels being included in this one independent variable, which is confluence model risk level. Okay, so this is one independent variable. The other independent variable, apparently I launched into Paint, perfect, exactly what I meant to do. The other independent variable is the use of pornography. So we have very frequently used pornography, somewhat frequently, seldom, and never. Okay, and then our dependent variable is the mean sexual aggression. So we're going to have scores on the dependent variable that we are going to determine whether they are impacted by the level of confluence model risk and then the level of pornography usage. Okay. Now, if we had only used one independent variable, confluence model risk level, let's say, instead of having these 4 lines, these 4 different points, for example, here on the high risk category, we would have 1 point that represents the average of these 4. So our high risk group would probably score somewhere right around, to average them, probably somewhere around here where my little finger is pointing. We would have 1 point there. For these 4, we'd probably average out to about here. For these 4, they're practically on top of each other anyway, so right about here. For these 4, it would be down here, probably about, looks like it would pull it down a little bit, so about here, and then somewhere right about here. Okay, I think I just launched the picture again. Dang it, I keep clicking it instead of clicking my other thing. Okay, so we would get a line that goes up based on your position on the confluence risk model. And that would be correct, and that would be interesting to find out that people who are in the higher risk category in fact have higher scores on the mean sexual aggression scale. The people who have the lowest risk have the lowest mean sexual aggression scores. That's informative. But look how much more interesting it is to be able to say, well, people who never use pornography, who are in this line with the circles on it, even if they're in a high risk category, are at a reasonably low risk of ever sexually offending in an aggressive way. And that if you use pornography seldomly or frequently, it doesn't really matter. If you're in the high risk group, you're sort of in this medium level risk. But where you're really at the highest risk is if you use pornography frequently and you're in the high risk category to offend. Now, interestingly, if we go down here, look at this. In the people who are in the low risk category, even if they use a lot of pornography, are still just like their peers. No matter how much pornography is being used, if you're in the low risk category, you're very unlikely to offend. So it does matter if we look at confluence model and pornography use together. We get a different picture than we would get if we just used one of these independent variables or the other one. So it's a really powerful way of figuring out what causes certain outcomes. It's a combination of factors. All right, here's another example. This is actually a correlational design, so it's not truly an experiment, but it's a correlational design. One of the things we're really interested in is whether watching violent television causes people to become violent, or in modern terms, whether playing violent video games makes people behave violently. So this is the outcome from a study that was begun in the 1960s and concluded in the late 1970s. And what they looked at is how much violent TV they watched when they were in third grade and how aggressively they behaved when they were in third grade. And they made predictions about how aggressively they would behave in 13th grade. So we must be in another country, right? This is from the UK. And their preference for watching violent TV in 13th grade. By taking both of these factors into consideration, we get a richer picture of outcomes in 13th grade than we would if all we had done is look at how much violent TV they watched, or if all we had looked at is how aggressively they behaved in 13th grade. What we find is that the level of aggression in 13th grade is the best predictor of aggression in 13th grade. You see it's a 0.38. This is roughly equivalent to a correlation coefficient when we look at numbers like this. So the closer you are to 0, the less related the two variables are. So the 0.38, that's not great, but it's definitely better than the aggression in third grade leading to watching TV in 13th grade, because look at that, it's only a 0.01. That's not correlated at all. In fact, how much violent TV you watched in third grade really doesn't predict how much violent TV you watch in 13th grade. How much violent TV you watch in third grade is a reasonably decent predictor of how aggressively you behave in 13th grade. So by taking both factors into consideration, we get a better picture of what's important in determining outcomes when we get older. The more factors we can include, the better we are able to make predictions. This kind of design is the lifeblood of psychology. I mean, we spend most of our time doing studies that include more than one independent variable, because as we've been talking about, nothing's ever caused by one thing. There's always more than one thing that goes into an outcome. So when we do these kinds of factorial designs, it allows us to look at combinations of independent variables, which is a lot more like the real world, isn't it? One of the complaints we oftentimes get, and we've talked about before, is that, experiments and research in general is so artificial. Well, when we add in more variables, it starts to become more like the real world. Of course, one of the things I'd like to point out is the real world is messy with all of its variables that are impacting outcomes. And so the more independent variables that we try and include, the messier our study is going to be. So let's come back in our next segment and talk about how many independent variables can we have.